The Fourth World War has begun, by Subcomandante Marcos. Piece number 2, The Globalization of Exploitation. Figure 2 is constructed by drawing a triangle. One of the lies of neoliberalism is that the economic growth of companies produces employment and a better distribution of wealth. This is untrue. In the same way that the increasing power of a king does not lead to an increase in the power of his subjects, far from it. The absolutism of finance capital does not improve the distribution of wealth, and does not create jobs. In fact, its structural consequences are poverty, unemployment, and precariousness. In the 1960s and 1970s, the number of poor people in the world, defined by the World Bank as having an income of less than $1 per day, rose to some 200 million people. By the start of the 1990s, their numbers stood at 2 billion. Hence, increasing numbers of people who are poor or have been made poor. Fewer and fewer people who are rich or have become rich. These are the lessons of piece 1 of our puzzle. In order to obtain this absurd result, the world capitalist system is modernizing the production, circulation, and consumption of commodities. The new technological revolution, information technology, and the new revolution in politics, the megalopolises emerging from the ruins of the nation-state, produce a new social revolution. This social revolution consists of a rearrangement, a reorganization of social forces, and, principally, of the workforce. The world's economically active population, EAP, went from 1.38 billion in 1960 to 2.37 billion in 1990. A large increase in the number of human beings capable of working and generating wealth. But the New World Order arranges this workforce within specific geographical and productive areas, and reassigns their functions, or non-functions, in the case of unemployed and precarious workers, within the plan of world globalization. The world's economically active population by sector, EAPS, has undergone radical changes during the past 20 years. Agriculture and fishing fell from 22% in 1970 to 12% in 1990. Manufacture from 25% to 22%. But the tertiary sector, commercial, transport, banking, and services, has risen from 42% to 56%. In developing countries, the tertiary sector has grown from 40% in 1970 to 57% in 1990, while agriculture and fishing have fallen from 30% to 15%. This means that increasing numbers of workers are channeled into the kind of activities necessary for increasing productivity or speeding up the creation of commodities. The neoliberal system thus functions as a kind of mega-boss, for whom the world market is viewed as a single, unified enterprise, to be managed by modernizing criteria. But neoliberalism's modernity seems closer to the bestial birth of capitalism as a world system than to utopian rationality, because this modern capitalist production continues to rely on child labor. Out of 1.15 billion children in the world, at least 100 million live on the streets, and 200 million work, and, according to forecasts, this figure will rise to 400 million by the year 2000. In Asia alone, 146 million children work in manufacturing, and in the north, too, Hundreds of thousands of children have to work in order to supplement family incomes, or merely to survive. There are also many children employed in the pleasure industries. According to the United Nations, every year 1 million children are driven into the sex trade. There are also many children employed in the pleasure industries. According to the United Nations, every year 1 million children are driven into the sex trade. The unemployment and precarious labor of millions of workers throughout the world is a reality which does not look set to disappear. The countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, unemployment in the countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, unemployment went from 3.8% in 1966 to 6.3% in 1990. In Europe, it went from 2.2% to 6.4%. The globalized market is destroying small and medium-sized companies. With the disappearance of local and regional markets, small and medium producers have no protection and are unable to compete with the giant transnationals. Millions of workers thus find themselves unemployed. One of the absurdities of neoliberalism is that far from creating jobs, the growth of production actually destroys them. The UN speaks of growth without jobs. But the nightmare does not end there. Workers are also being forced to accept precarious conditions, less job security, longer working hours, and lower wages. These are the consequences of globalization in general, and the explosion in the service sector in particular. All this combines to create a specific surplus, an excess of human beings who are useless in terms of the New World Order because they do not produce, do not consume, and do not borrow from banks. In short, human beings who are disposable. Each day, the big finance centers impose their laws on countries and groups of countries all around the world. They rearrange and reorder the inhabitants of those countries, and at the end of the operation, they find there is still an excess of people. What you have now is a figure resembling a triangle. This depicts the pyramid of worldwide exploitation.